I'm an ordinary guy. I'm 29 years old. And this happened last year, a few months after I got married. My wife and I rented a semi-detached house in a quiet suburb of North Carolina near Raleigh, because it was close to her work, and the rent was reasonable. It was one of those silent streets with identical houses, well-kept lawns, and almost no movement after 8 at night. We had just moved out of an apartment and were still in that adjustment period, buying furniture little by little and trying to create a routine. I left early for work, she left a bit later, and at night we almost always stayed home. No parties, no noise. Precisely because of that, the place seemed safe. I truly believed it was one of those neighborhoods where nothing happens. In the very first week, we met the neighbor on the other side of the shared wall. A man in his 40s, overly polite, the kind who speaks softly and smiles without showing his teeth. He said he worked from home with something related to IT, so he spent the entire day there. At first, the conversations were normal. Comments about the weather, the trash on the curb, things like that. But little by little, he started making strange observations, like commenting that I always left around 6:40 in the morning, or that my wife always got home from work after 6 p.m. The first time, I thought it was a coincidence. The second time, it already bothered me a bit. Even so, I rationalized it by saying the houses were attached and that maybe he was just too observant. I didn't want to seem paranoid right after moving in. As the days went by, these comments became more specific. He would say things like, "Yesterday you got home later," or, "I noticed the bedroom light always goes out before 11. He said it laughing, as if it were just small talk, but it started to make me tense. I had never stopped to think about the time someone else's bedroom light went off. My wife also started to notice and asked me if I thought that was normal. I said maybe he was just lonely, or that working from home made a person pay too much attention to what happened around them. Even so, I started being more cautious, closing the blinds earlier, avoiding going out into the side corridor. The atmosphere inside the house changed a bit. It became quieter, more alert. One Friday, I left work earlier because I was feeling sick. It was around 5 in the afternoon, still light outside, something that wasn't part of my routine. When I parked the car, I noticed something strange in the narrow corridor between the houses. The neighbor was there, standing, almost pressed against the wall, looking straight at our bedroom window. He didn't seem surprised when he saw me. He turned slowly and said he had heard a strange noise, as if he were checking something out. What chilled me was when he commented, completely casually, that wasn't the time we usually got home and that normally we were already asleep when the bedroom light went out. His calm manner, mixed with his certainty about our schedules, gave me a knot in my stomach that didn't go away quickly. I stood there for a few seconds without knowing what to say. I just said something vague, like that I had left early, and went into the house too quickly. I locked the door hard, something I never did, and went straight to tell my wife. She turned pale when she heard it, especially when I said he was looking exactly at our bedroom window. The feeling was one of invasion, even though he hadn't entered the house. That side corridor was narrow. You could hear any step, any breathing there. For the rest of the afternoon, we stayed silent, trying to act normal, but paying attention to any sound coming from the wall. I felt watched, even inside the house. That night, we decided to turn off the lights earlier and pretend everything was normal. Around 10, the neighborhood was completely quiet. You could only hear air conditioners turning on and off. I was lying down, but I couldn't sleep. At some point, I heard footsteps outside, slow, stopping very close to the bedroom window. I couldn't see anything, just the shadow of the closed blind. My heart started racing and I tried to listen to see if it was just someone passing by or if they had stopped there. That's when I heard a light scraping sound, as if something had brushed against the wall. My wife squeezed my hand hard without saying anything. Neither of us had the courage to look. After a few seconds, the footsteps moved away, but I couldn't relax. I stared at the ceiling, counting the time between one noise and another, trying to convince my mind that it could have been a cat or someone walking down the sidewalk. Even so, the detail that wouldn't leave my mind was the exact spot where the footsteps had stopped, right under our window. The house was dark, only the faint light from the street lamp coming through the gap in the curtain. The air felt heavier, warmer, and I could smell a faint scent of wet earth coming from outside. My wife whispered, asking if I thought he was still there. I said I didn't know, and that was the most uncomfortable truth possible. Around midnight, I heard my phone vibrate on the nightstand. It was a message from a number I didn't have saved. It just said, "All quiet now." I froze instantly. I didn't reply, and I didn't show it to my wife right away. I turned off the screen and stared into the dark, trying to understand how someone could have my number. Minutes later, I heard noise in the side corridor again, this time shorter, like someone leaving. The next day, we told the landlord what had happened, and he said that neighbor had caused coexistence problems before. 2 weeks later, we requested to terminate the lease and moved out. We never saw the man again. Even today, when I turn off the light before going to sleep, I think about who might be noticing that. That same night, I got up slowly and went to the living room without turning on any lights. The house was too cold for that time of year, the floor icy under my feet, and you could hear a distant hum from the streetlights outside. I stood near the back door, trying to decide whether to call the police or if that would only make things worse. I didn't have a direct threat, just that horrible feeling of someone knowing too much about our routine. I went back to the bedroom and sat on the bed, awake, listening to every creak of the house, every groan of the wood, waiting for some noise that would confirm I wasn't exaggerating everything in my head. Around 2 in the morning, I heard the neighbor's front door slam and the sound of a car starting. I peeked through the gap in the curtain and saw the headlights slowly moving away down the empty street. There were no more footsteps, no shadows in the corridor. Even so, we didn't sleep until the sun began to rise. When the morning light came into the bedroom, it didn't bring relief, only exhaustion and the certainty that something there had crossed a line. Nothing else happened in that house after that, but the feeling of being watched didn't go away easily. To this day, I remember the calm way he talked about our schedules, as if that were normal. In the following days, I started noticing things I had ignored before. Shoe prints in the side corridor near the damp soil, as if someone had stood there for a while. The low fence between the houses always seemed disturbed, slightly crooked, even without strong wind. I didn't tell my wife at first because I didn't want to increase her fear, but I started locking everything even during the day. Working and leaving the house became a strange relief, as if the problem were confined to that place. Still, every time we came back, I automatically looked at the bedroom window before going inside. The silence of the neighborhood, which had once seemed calm, started to sound artificial, almost rehearsed. On the last night before we left, with boxes already spread around the house, I heard someone walking on the other side of the shared wall. It wasn't the normal sound of footsteps, it was too slow, like someone walking without any hurry. At one point, I heard a light touch on the wall, on the side of our bed, as if someone had placed their hand there. It wasn't a knock, nor a scratch. It was just a brief contact, almost casual. I didn't do anything. I stayed still, holding my breath, waiting for it to stop. And it did. The next morning, we loaded the car and left without telling anyone on the street. I never went back there. But to this day, whenever someone comments too much about schedules, I feel the same knot in my stomach. Story 2. I'm a university student, I'm 22 years old, and this happened in my second year of college when I was living alone in an old building in a small town in Massachusetts. It was one of those small buildings, 3 stories tall, built in the 1940s, with wooden stairs that creaked and narrow hallways that always smelled like dust and cheap cleaning products. I had rented that apartment because it was close to campus and fit my budget. It wasn't pretty, but it seemed safe enough. My apartment was on the 2nd floor, and there was only one above mine. At that stage of my life, I spent most of my time studying, working part-time and sleeping at irregular hours. I hardly ever had visitors. From the very first week, I noticed that the neighbor upstairs was strange. I don't remember ever seeing her face even once. I never saw anyone entering or leaving that apartment, neither during the day nor at night. Still, almost every night, after 10 o'clock, the noises would start. Slow footsteps, furniture being dragged, something heavy sliding across the floor. What was most disturbing wasn't the noise itself, but the pattern. Whenever I lay down in bed, the sounds would stop exactly above my bedroom. If I got up to go to the bathroom or went to the living room, after some time the footsteps seemed to follow and position themselves over where I was. I tried to ignore it at first, telling myself it was just a neighbor with strange habits in an old building. Even so, It started to get to me. At first, I thought maybe she worked nights or had some kind of insomnia. The building was old, sound traveled easily, so I tried to be rational. I used headphones, turned on a fan for white noise, anything to avoid paying attention. But nothing really helped. The sound of something being dragged was dry, like wood scraping against wood, and it lasted for several minutes. Sometimes it stopped suddenly, as if the person had gone completely still. In those moments, I would lie there staring at the ceiling, feeling that heavy silence that comes after constant noise. My body would tense up without me noticing, stiff shoulders, shallow breathing. After a few weeks, I began to notice that I never heard other normal sounds of someone living there. No television, no music, no people talking on the phone, no toilet flushing, no shower. Just footsteps and furniture being moved, always at night. During the day, the apartment above seemed completely dead. No vibrations, no noise at all. That bothered me more than the noise itself. I even commented about it to a college friend, laughing, saying my neighbor must be rearranging her apartment every night. Saying it out loud seemed to lighten the weight of it. But when I got home and climbed the creaking stairs, the discomfort came back immediately, as if the whole building were waiting. There was one night when the noise started earlier, around 9 o'clock. I was still sitting at my desk studying, when I heard something heavy being dragged very slowly. It sounded closer than usual, almost as if the floor were thinner. The sound stopped exactly above my chair. I froze, pen in hand, waiting to hear something else, but there was only that dense silence again. My stomach twisted for no clear reason. I got up and went to the kitchen, and a few seconds later I heard footsteps following until they stopped above the sink area. That made me feel watched in a way that didn't make rational sense but was impossible to ignore. The next morning I ran into the building manager in the hallway. She was an older woman, lived on the ground floor, and always looked tired. I casually asked if the apartment upstairs was occupied, trying to sound normal. She frowned and said no, that the last tenant had moved out months earlier because of a leak in the bathroom. I froze for a few seconds. I asked if anyone had moved in after that, and she said no, that the apartment was closed waiting for renovations. I laughed awkwardly, as if I had misunderstood, and said goodbye. I went back up to my apartment with my heart racing, trying to convince myself there had to be some simple explanation I hadn't considered yet. That night I tried to stay awake later than usual, just to see if the noises would really happen again. I turned off the lights, left only the bedside lamp on, and sat on the bed scrolling on my phone. The building was completely quiet. I could hear the wind hitting the hallway windows and a pipe knocking every now and then. Around 10:30 it started. First light footsteps, then something being pushed slowly, as if someone were moving a piece of furniture without wanting to make noise. The sound got closer until it stopped exactly above my bed. I turned off the lamp and stayed in the dark with the clear feeling that if I moved, whatever was up there would move too. The next day, I woke up to the sound of water dripping in the bathroom. The ceiling above the shower had a dark stain that hadn't been there before. I went to the manager's office and told her about the leak. She sighed, grabbed a set of keys, and said she would need to enter the apartment upstairs to see where the problem was coming from. I asked to go with her, without really knowing how to explain why. When we opened the door to the apartment, the smell of a closed-up place hit immediately. Dust, mold, stale air. There was no furniture, no boxes, nothing. The floor was too clean in one specific spot, right in the center of the bedroom that was exactly above mine. There, the floor had recent marks, as if someone had been standing in the same place repeatedly. The manager stood there looking at the floor for a few seconds without saying anything. She crouched down, slowly ran her hand over those marks, and commented that it didn't make sense for them to be there. She said no one had entered that apartment since the previous tenant left, because the leak got worse when it rained. I looked around, trying to connect that empty space to the noises I heard every night. The bedroom was small, with a single dusty window and walls stained with moisture. There was no sign that anyone lived there. No mattress, no new light fixtures, nothing personal. Even so, those marks on the floor looked far too fresh for an abandoned place. We went back down to my apartment in silence. The manager said she would call someone to check the leak and tried to act as if it were nothing serious. But that night, the noises returned. Slow footsteps, the dragging of something heavy, all at the same time as always. I lay there staring at the ceiling, knowing exactly where the marks were upstairs. The sounds stopped again over my bed and stayed there for a long time. I didn't sleep. The following weekend, I went to a friend's house and a few days later, asked to terminate the lease. I never slept in that building again. To this day, when I hear footsteps above me at night, my body freezes before I can even think. After requesting the termination, I still had to stay 3 more nights in the apartment while I arranged the move. They were the longest nights I remember spending alone. I avoided lying in bed and stayed on the couch with the kitchen light on, trying to stay awake. Even so, the noises kept happening at the same time, always above where I was. They weren't as long anymore, but they were precise, as if whoever was walking knew exactly where I had stopped. At no point did I hear anyone going up or down the building's stairs. That made me more nervous than any sound. On the last night, almost at dawn, the footsteps stopped for longer than usual. I stayed still, gripping my phone tightly, waiting to hear something again. After a few minutes, I felt a light vibration on the ceiling, as if someone had stopped exactly above me and stayed there, in silence. There was no more noise after that. When morning came, I packed the rest of my things and left without looking back. The manager wished me good luck as if nothing strange had happened. I never went down that street again, but I still think about that exact spot on the ceiling and about how something seemed to know where I was all the time. The following week, already in my new apartment, I tried to explain everything to myself logically. Old buildings make noise, wood expands, pipes move, that kind of thing. I repeated that like a mantra whenever I remembered the nights in Massachusetts. Even so, there were details that didn't fit. The way the sounds always positioned themselves exactly above me. The absolute silence during the day. The marks on the floor of that empty room. None of that matched simple creaks of old construction. I felt ridiculous for still thinking about it, but at the same time I couldn't just erase it from my mind. A few months later, I came across an online post about that building by chance. Someone was commenting about nighttime noises coming from empty apartments, almost the same way I had experienced. I didn't reach out, didn't reply, didn't want to know more. I closed the page and tried to move on. But to this day, if I live somewhere with someone above me, I pay too much attention to the sounds. And if the noise stops exactly when I stop, my body reacts before my mind does. I don't know what really happened in that apartment. I only know that I will never live in an old building again without thinking about it. Story 3. I am the father of 2 young children. I'm 34 years old, and this happened shortly after we moved to a typical residential neighborhood in rural Indiana. My wife, the kids, and I moved from an apartment into a house with a backyard specifically because of them. Quiet street, lots of families, people walking their dogs in the late afternoon. I worked regular business hours. My wife stayed home more, and the kids spent a good part of their time in the backyard after school. We put up a simple wooden swing near the fence and left toys scattered around. It was exactly the kind of place where you let your guard down quickly, because everything seems too normal. The neighbor from the house next door introduced himself in the first week. An older man, maybe in his late 50s, thin, always wearing a cap. He was polite, spoke little, said he had lived there for many years. A few days later, he started showing up in the backyard saying that his son's ball had fallen there. At first, it made sense. The kids played together sometimes, and balls do fly over fences. He would come in, grab the ball quickly, and leave. I never found it strange. But after a while, I realized he showed up even when my kids weren't playing, or when there wasn't even a ball in the yard. I tried not to jump to conclusions, but I started paying too much attention to those details. As the weeks went by, it became far too routine. Sometimes I was in the kitchen washing dishes and saw him walking through the backyard as if it were normal. When I asked if everything was okay, he always had a ready answer, saying he thought the ball had fallen there or that he was just checking near the swing. His tone was always calm, almost too casual. I began to notice that he stayed longer than necessary, standing still and looking around before leaving. My wife commented that she also felt uncomfortable, especially when she was alone with the kids. We talked about putting a padlock on the side gate but ended up postponing it, saying it might be an overreaction. What bothered me most was that he seemed to know exactly when the kids were or weren't in the backyard. On days when they stayed inside, he still showed up, walking slowly, looking at the empty swing. He didn't talk to anyone, just said something like, "I thought I heard them playing." That started to make me irritated and alert at the same time. I began paying attention to schedules, sounds, the way he always approached from the same corner of the fence. The feeling was that he was more interested in the backyard than in any supposed balls. Even so, I still tried to convince myself that I was misinterpreting everything, because nothing concrete had happened yet. One Saturday night after putting the kids to bed, I went to the kitchen to get some water. The backyard light was off. Only a bit of light from the street lamp came in. When I looked through the window, I saw a silhouette near the swing. My first thought was that one of the kids had gotten up, but immediately I realized that was impossible. They were asleep, and the back door was locked. I opened the door slowly and took 2 steps outside. It was the neighbor, standing behind the swing completely in the dark, his hands down and his body motionless. My heart started pounding because he didn't react immediately to my presence. When I asked what he was doing there, he turned slowly and said he thought he had heard the kids calling. His voice was low, almost casual, as if that were a normal explanation. I said the kids were sleeping and that there was no one in the backyard. He stayed silent for a few seconds, looking at the house, then said, "Oh, then I must have been mistaken." He didn't apologize, didn't mention any ball. He just walked past me and left through the side gate. I stood there for a while, feeling the cold night air and trying to understand what had just happened. I went back inside and locked the door harder than usual. I stood in the living room for a few minutes, listening only to the low hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of a car passing on the street. My wife noticed immediately that something was wrong. I told her what had happened, trying not to alarm her too much, but she was visibly shaken. We went to check on the kids, who were sleeping deeply. With no sign of having woken up, I returned to the living room with the clear feeling that his explanation made no sense at all. There were no laughs, no voices, no ball, just him in the dark behind the swing. I stayed awake the rest of the night. I sat on the couch with all the lights off, watching the backyard through the glass door. The swing moved slightly with the wind, creaking from time to time. Every sound felt too loud. At one point I saw movement near the fence, but when I focused more closely, there was no one there. I tried to separate fear from over-attention, but my body didn't follow logic. Every time I thought about sleeping, I remembered the way he had stood there, as if he were waiting for something. The next day, I put a padlock on the side gate early in the morning. I didn't say anything to the neighbor, I just avoided contact. The kids asked why they couldn't play alone in the backyard anymore, and I made up some excuse about safety. Throughout the day, I kept watching through the window, trying to act normal but overly alert to any movement on the other side of the fence. At no point did I see the neighbor leave his house, but I had the constant feeling that he knew something had changed, as if the padlock had been a silent warning. That night, close to 11, I heard footsteps in the backyard. They weren't fast or heavy. They were careful steps going to where the swing was. I looked through the glass door and saw his figure standing there again, now outside the gate, looking in. He didn't try to come in, didn't call out to anyone. He just stood there, motionless, for far too long. After a few minutes, he slowly walked away. The next day, I started looking for another house. We moved a few weeks later. There was never a confrontation, never an explanation. But to this day, when I hear someone in the backyard at night, my first thought isn't curiosity, it's fear. Sometime after we moved, I tried to reconstruct the sequence of events in my head, as if reviewing everything in order might make it feel less heavy. He never did anything openly aggressive. He never touched the kids, never forced entry, never made threats. And maybe that's exactly what still bothers me the most. Everything stayed in that strange space between acceptable and wrong. A man entering the backyard because of a ball, an out-of-place comment, a constant presence where there should have been no one. If I told this to someone who hadn't lived there, it would sound like an exaggeration. But I was there night after night, feeling that something was out of place. Today we live in another neighborhood, another city, and the routine is different. The kids play, the yard is fenced, and nothing like that has happened again. Even so, I never leave the gate unlocked anymore, not even in the afternoon. I always look toward the back of the yard before turning off the lights. Sometimes I catch myself thinking about what might have happened if I hadn't opened the door that night, if I hadn't seen him there, standing behind the swing in the dark. Maybe nothing. Or maybe that was just the beginning of something I'd rather not imagine. All I know is that since then I've learned that not all danger makes noise. Some of it just stands still, waiting for someone to think it's normal enough. Story 4. I live alone. I'm 31 years old. And this happened when I was living in an old building in northern New Jersey near Newark. I had moved recently because of work and chose that place because it was cheap and close to the train station. The building was old with noisy plumbing, exposed ducts, and that constant smell of dampness in the hallways. My apartment was small but functional. I spent most of my time working, and when I got home, all I wanted was to take a shower and be in silence. I never felt completely comfortable there, but I attributed that to the fact that I was living alone for the first time in years. Everything started on an ordinary night after work. I was in the bathroom removing my makeup in front of the mirror when I heard a low male voice, as if it were coming from inside the wall. At first, I thought it was someone talking in the apartment next door or a sound coming from the plumbing. But then the voice said something like, "You always wash your face first." I froze, cotton pad in my hand, trying to understand what I had heard. The tone wasn't aggressive, it was almost casual, like an offhand comment. I called out a nervous, "Hello?" But there was no response. The bathroom went silent again, with only the faint hum of the fan. In the following days, I tried to convince myself that it had been my imagination or some strange sound amplified by the duct. The entire building made noise all the time, especially at night. Even so, I started paying closer attention to sounds when I went into the bathroom. And that's when it happened again. I was taking a shower, hot water, steam filling the space, when I clearly heard the same voice saying that I took longer showers when I got home late from work. My body went cold even with the hot water falling on me. I turned off the shower immediately and stood there in silence, listening to my own breathing. The voice didn't return, but the feeling of being watched stuck with me. That night, I barely slept. I lay there staring at the ceiling, trying to think of possible explanations. Maybe someone in the neighboring apartment was joking. Maybe the sound was coming from multiple places and my brain was connecting the wrong dots. The next day, I casually asked the doorman if anyone new had moved in near me. He said the building was almost full, but mentioned that apartment 3B had been empty for some time, waiting for maintenance. That gave me a strange chill in my stomach, but I still tried not to jump to conclusions. I just wanted it to stop. The next night, before going to bed, I decided to test something. I went into the bathroom and turned on the duct fan, leaving the apartment otherwise silent. I stood still, listening. For a few minutes, nothing happened. When I was about to turn it off, the voice came back, closer than before, saying my name in a low tone, as if calling someone on the other side of a thin wall. My heart started beating so hard I could feel it in my temples. The voice commented that I always left the towel hanging crooked behind the door. That wasn't something visible from outside, nor something someone could guess. I almost ran out of the bathroom and slammed the door shut. The next day, I bought a new vent cover and taped around it with electrical tape, trying to seal the duct as much as possible. The bathroom became stuffy, but I preferred that to hearing that voice again. For a few hours, I felt relieved, as if I had regained some control. When I got home from work that night, I found a folded piece of paper under my apartment door. Written by hand on it was a simple sentence commenting on something I had done that morning inside my home. There was no name, no threat, just clear proof that someone knew too much. I stood in the hallway for a few seconds before picking up the note. The building was silent. I could only hear the old elevator going up somewhere far away. I read the sentence more than once, trying to find an explanation that didn't involve someone being inside my apartment. It didn't make sense. No one had entered, the door was locked, and I live alone. I went inside quickly, locked everything, and went straight to check every room. I looked under the bed, inside the closet, behind the bathroom curtain. Nothing out of place. Still, the feeling was that the apartment had been used while I wasn't there. That night, I didn't use the bathroom. I stayed on the couch with the television on just to avoid silence. Even with the duct sealed, I kept staring at the bathroom door as if I expected to hear something at any moment. At some point in the early morning, I heard a faint noise coming from there. Not a voice, but something like someone breathing slowly, muffled by the wall. It could have been the building settling, but my body reacted as if it wasn't. My stomach turned, my hands sweated, and I spent the rest of the night awake, counting the hours until dawn. The next day, I took the note with me to work, as if removing it from the apartment might lessen the weight of it. I showed it to a coworker and tried to explain it while laughing, but my voice didn't match. She said I should talk to building management or the police. After work, I went straight to management. I explained about the voice, the duct, and the note. The manager listened with a tired expression and said he would check apartment 3B. A few hours later, he called me saying that 3B was empty, with no signs of recent occupancy, and that there was no record of anyone having access to that specific duct besides old maintenance. The conversation didn't reassure me at all. When I returned home that night, the hallway felt narrower than usual. I entered the apartment already expecting to find something out of place. On the floor near the bathroom door, there was another folded piece of paper. This time, the sentence mentioned something I had said out loud while getting ready to leave earlier that day. It wasn't something visible, nor something someone would hear from the hallway. I sat on the floor leaning against the door, feeling a tightness in my chest that wouldn't go away. I didn't hear the voice that night, but that didn't bring relief. The silence seemed only to confirm that someone knew I had sealed the duct. I started sleeping with the bathroom light on and the door closed, even knowing that didn't make much sense. Any small noise made me jump. The building creaked, the pipes knocked, and I could no longer tell what was normal and what wasn't. That night, while I was lying there trying to breathe deeply, I heard a light sound coming from the front door, as if something had been pushed underneath it. I got up slowly and found another note. The sentence commented exactly on how long I had stood still in the shower the day before I decided to stop using the bathroom. My legs went weak. That wasn't coincidence or imagination. The next morning, I packed a backpack with the basics and went to work determined not to go straight home. I called a friend and vaguely explained that I needed to stay away for a few days. Before leaving the apartment, I took one last look at the bathroom. The duct was still sealed, the tape intact. Even so, I had the clear feeling of being watched as I closed the door. I never spent another night in that place. A few weeks later, I learned that apartment 3B was still empty with no registered tenant, no recent history. No one was ever found. To this day, I avoid bathrooms with exposed ducts and can't ignore the idea that someone might hear more than they should. A few days later, I returned to the building during the day with my brother to get the rest of my things. In natural light, everything seemed less threatening, almost too normal. Even so, I avoided looking at the bathroom. While I was putting clothes into boxes, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. The old vent grill had fingerprints on it, as if someone had pressed there many times. They weren't old, random dust marks. They were concentrated along the edges, at the exact point where the sound seemed to come from. My brother said it was probably something old, but the way they were positioned didn't match maintenance or construction work. I didn't take a photo, I just wanted to leave quickly. Before leaving, I found one last note under the door, even knowing that no one had entered after I left the first time. It was short. It just said that I had forgotten to turn off the living room light the last time. That hit me in a strange way because it was true. I hadn't told anyone that. I closed the door, handed the key to management days later, and never went back. I don't know who was talking to me through the duct, nor how that information reached him. I only know that to this day, when I hear air moving through a ventilation system that's too quiet, my body reacts before my mind does. Story 5. I am a 41-year-old man, divorced, and this happened about 2 years ago when I was living alone in a single-story house in the suburbs of Tucson, Arizona. After the divorce, I wanted a simple, quiet place, without neighbors too close by. The house was on a calm street with large lots, low fences, and dim lighting at night. I worked during the day and always got home at the same time. I didn't receive visitors and didn't have an active social routine. My nights were predictable: a simple dinner, the television on, bed early. It was the kind of life that doesn't draw attention. I liked that. I knew the neighbors only by sight. A quick wave, nothing more than that. One of them lived 2 houses down from mine. I never really talked to him, but I knew who he was. A thin man, overly polite, always with proper posture, the kind of person who seems determined not to bother anyone. One Tuesday night, close to 10 o'clock, I heard someone knock on the front door. It wasn't common to receive visitors at that hour. I pulled the curtain aside just enough to see who it was and recognized that neighbor standing on the porch, hands visible, relaxed posture. I opened the door only as far as the chain allowed. He said he needed to use the phone for a minute because his cell phone had run out of battery. His voice was calm, too controlled for that hour. I said I couldn't help. I explained that I was already in bed and that I didn't feel comfortable letting someone in that late. I said it politely, trying not to sound hostile. He didn't change his expression. He just nodded and said he understood, but he stayed there, standing. After a few seconds, he commented that it was just a quick call, that he didn't even need to come inside properly. He could stay right at the door. The chain was still on, and I felt a strange discomfort that he didn't take a single step back. I repeated that it wasn't possible. He smiled slightly and said, "That's fine," but he didn't move. We stayed like that for a few minutes that felt far too long. He kept talking in a low, polite tone, saying it was just that once, that he didn't want to bother anyone, that he understood my concern. The problem was that he wouldn't leave. He didn't raise his voice, didn't make threats, didn't change his tone, he just insisted. That started to make me nervous in a way that's hard to explain. At some point, I said I needed to close the door and began pulling it shut slowly. He finally took a step back and said, "Of course, no problem." I watched through the window as he walked down the sidewalk calmly, without looking back. I locked the door, checked the windows, and tried to sleep. But I was left with the feeling that I had spent too much time talking to someone I shouldn't have. The next morning, I woke up with that uncomfortable sense that something was out of place. Nothing obvious, just a persistent unease. I went to the kitchen to make coffee and noticed that the back door was unlocked. I have an automatic habit of locking everything before bed, especially after the divorce when I started living alone. I stood there for a few seconds staring at the lock, trying to remember if I could have forgotten. I couldn't. The backyard looked normal, nothing out of place, no visible footprints in the dry soil. Even so, I locked the door and spent the rest of the morning trying to rationalize it, telling myself that memory lapses happen. That night, when I went to the bedroom, I noticed something on the window that faced the side yard. There were fingerprints on the glass, right at the height of my face when I'm lying down. They weren't old dust marks. They looked recent, greasy, as if someone had rested their hand there for a few seconds. I ran my finger over them and felt the oil from skin. My stomach turned instantly. I closed the curtain hard and checked all the locks again. I tried to remember if anyone other than me could have touched that window, but it was too high for someone to reach casually. That was the first night I slept with a light on since moving into that house. In the following days, I started paying attention to things I had previously ignored. The side gate sometimes seemed out of place, as if it had been opened and closed carefully. Nothing broken, nothing forced. Just details too small to prove anything. I cleaned the windows every morning, almost like a ritual, and at night I would find similar marks again, always in the same spot. Never on other windows, never on the front door, only in the bedroom. That began to affect my sleep. I woke up several times during the night, thinking I had heard something in the yard, but when I got up, everything was too quiet, that dry silence typical of the desert. I decided to talk to the neighbor a few days later, more out of a need to face it than because I expected any answers. I found him on the street, watering his garden, and started a conversation. I asked casually if he had come back to my house after that night. He frowned as if genuinely confused and said no, that he had solved the phone problem by walking to an open store farther down the road. He swore he had never been near my house again. His tone was calm, convincing even. There was no nervousness, no exaggerated defensiveness. That made me feel worse than if he had reacted strangely. After that, I started closing up the house as if someone really were trying to get in, even without concrete proof. I locked the back door with an extra bar and left a light on in the yard all night. Even so, the marks kept appearing. Not every night, but often enough that I never relaxed. Sometimes it was just 2 fingers, sometimes the whole hand. Always on the same window, always at the same height. I woke up with the sun already hot against the wall and went straight to check, as if that were part of the routine now. Every time I wiped the glass, I felt a strange fatigue, as if I were erasing something that would come back anyway. One early morning I woke up with the clear feeling that someone was very close to the house. I didn't hear footsteps or a door, just that sharp instinct that pulls you out of sleep. I lay there without moving, listening to the air conditioner and the faint wind outside. At some point I heard a soft click coming from the kitchen area, similar to the sound of a doorknob being tested carefully. I didn't get up. I stayed still waiting to hear something else. Nothing came. When morning came, the back door was unlocked again. There were no signs of forced entry. Nothing was missing. That left me with the uncomfortable certainty that someone knew exactly how to come in and out without leaving a trace. After that, I stopped trying to understand how it was happening and started acting only to feel minimally safe. I changed the locks, installed simple sensors on the doors, and started sleeping with my phone charged next to the bed. Even so, I couldn't regain the feeling of privacy. The bedroom stopped being a place of rest. I avoided looking directly at the window at night and kept the curtain closed at all times, even in the Arizona heat. Sometimes I woke up with the impression that I had heard breathing outside, but when I sat up in bed, there was only silence and the distant sound of a car passing on the main avenue. My body was always on alert, as if it already knew that something wasn't resolved. A few weeks later, the marks simply stopped appearing. No explanation, no transition. The back door was locked every morning. The gate didn't move anymore. That should have brought relief, but it didn't. It felt more like the end of a surveillance than the resolution of a problem. Not long after that, I put the house up for sale. I didn't tell the story to anyone on the street. The neighbor kept waving when we crossed paths, polite as always. There was never another request to use the phone. There was never a confrontation. But to this day, when someone knocks on my door at night and speaks too calmly, I don't go near it. Because I learned that not all insistence comes with urgency. Some of it comes only to test how far you'll let it in. Before I moved, I spent one last night in that house barely sleeping. There was no noise, no new marks, nothing concrete happening. Even so, I lay there staring at the ceiling, feeling that heavy silence that isn't peace. It's waiting. I got up a few times to check doors and windows, even knowing I had already done that. Every click of a lock sounded too loud in the emptiness of the house. I had the constant feeling that if I relaxed for even a second, something would happen. It didn't, and somehow that was even worse. On the day of the move, while loading the last boxes into the car, I saw the neighbor standing in his yard, watching me from a distance. He wasn't hiding or doing anything strange. Just standing there, hands in his pockets, neutral expression. When our eyes met, he raised his hand in a short, polite wave, as always. I waved back out of reflex. I got into the car and drove away without looking in the rearview mirror. I never went down that street again. I never tried to understand exactly what he wanted that night. All I know is that to this day, I live with doors tightly locked and windows covered. Because sometimes the most frightening thing isn't someone forcing their way in, it's someone calmly testing whether you'd let them open the door. Story 6. My wife and I moved to that old neighborhood in rural Michigan at the beginning of winter. I'm 36, she's 34, and we were looking for a quieter place after a few years of living in a big city. The house was old but well maintained, on a street full of old trees, uneven sidewalks, and yellowish streetlights. The kind of neighborhood where everything becomes very quiet after 6 in the evening. The house next door stood out right away. It was bigger than ours and looked inhabited, but we never saw a car parked there. At first, we didn't think much of it. We figured maybe someone worked away from home or used a garage in the back. The first nights were normal until we started noticing movement in the windows of the house next door. Not active movement, not people walking around. They were stationary silhouettes, visible when the inside lights were off and the reflection from the street hit the glass. They looked like people standing, looking out, always motionless. The first time I saw it, I thought it was a shadow from furniture or curtains. But then it happened again at another time, in another window. My wife started noticing it too. Sometimes it was early in the morning, sometimes at night. They never waved, never moved. They were just there as if they were watching the street or our house. That began to make us uneasy in a way that's hard to explain. As the days went by, we started paying closer attention to details. The house always looked the same. The lights never turned on, the curtains never changed position, the yard wasn't taken care of, but it also wasn't abandoned enough to look neglected. Even so, the silhouettes appeared. Sometimes it was clearly the shape of a head and shoulders. Other times something lower, like someone standing behind a ground floor window. What bothered us most was the sense of consistency. No matter the time, whenever we looked closely, there was the impression that someone was there, standing still, staring. It wasn't immediate fear, it was discomfort. Like noticing someone staring at you on public transportation and not knowing if it's all in your head. One night around 10, we turned off the living room lights and left only the TV on. That's when we saw it more clearly. In the window of the house next door on the second floor, there was a well-defined silhouette standing directly facing our living room. It didn't move, didn't change position. We spent several minutes staring in silence, waiting for any reaction. Nothing. The TV reflected faintly on the neighbor's window and the figure stayed there, completely still. When my wife got up to get water from the kitchen, the silhouette didn't follow her. It remained standing there as if it were only looking at where we had been. That made my stomach tighten in a way that didn't pass easily. After that night, I began observing the neighboring house almost automatically. Every time I came home from work, before even unlocking the door, I looked at the windows next door. Sometimes I saw nothing, which brought a strange sense of relief. But at other times, especially in the late afternoon when the light dropped and the gray sky typical of a Michigan winter started to darken early, the silhouettes appeared again. Never more than one at a time. Always a single, motionless shape as if someone were there only to observe, not to live. No sound ever came from that house. No doors opening, no footsteps in the yard. Nothing that confirmed a real presence. A few days later, I decided to ask a longtime neighbor on the street, an older man who was always sweeping the sidewalk in the mornings. I casually asked if anyone lived in the house next to ours. He stopped sweeping and looked at the house for a few seconds before answering that, no, it had been empty for years. He said the last resident had moved out after a serious problem, and no one had ever rented or bought the place since. I asked if anyone had a key, if someone went there from time to time. He shook his head and said he hadn't seen anyone go in there for a very long time. I went back home with the clear feeling that none of it made sense because someone, somehow, was always there. After that conversation, the discomfort became constant inside our house. It was no longer curiosity. It was hyper-awareness. We started closing the curtains earlier and avoiding sitting in the living room with the lights off when it faced the neighboring house. Even so, sometimes as I walked down the hallway, I would catch a dark shape out of the corner of my eye in one of their windows. When I stopped to look properly, it was already gone. My wife said she felt the same way, as if the house next door was reacting to our presence, not the other way around. The silence of that building felt active, not empty. One night I woke up for no clear reason. The house was cold, the heater had shut off, and the bedroom was in absolute silence. I looked out the window and saw a silhouette on the upper floor of the house next door, perfectly aligned with our bed. It was clearer than ever. It didn't move, didn't blink, didn't do anything. I lay there without waking my wife, trying to decide if it could be some strange reflection. I watched it for minutes that felt far too long, until the silhouette simply disappeared as if someone had taken a step back. There was no sound, no light. It just vanished. I couldn't sleep after that. The next morning I told my wife what I had seen while we were having coffee. She stayed quiet for a while and then said that a few nights earlier, she had seen something similar while I was asleep. She hadn't woken me because she thought she was just too tired. That made us even more tense because it meant it wasn't an isolated thing. We decided to ask more people on the street, trying not to sound strange. The answers were similar. Everyone said the house was empty, that no one went in there, that sometimes people showed interest in buying it, but nothing ever came of it. Some commented that they avoided looking at that house too much. without really being able to explain why. A few nights later, the power on the street went out for a few minutes. Our house was left in darkness, lit only by the weak moonlight, and the snow piled up, reflecting a bit of light. That was when we saw more than one silhouette at the same time. Two shapes in different windows of the neighboring house, both standing still, facing ours. They didn't move toward each other, didn't seem to interact. It was as if they were there only to observe. When the power came back, the streetlights turned on and the windows of the house next door looked empty again. We sat on the couch for a long time after that, without saying anything, trying to understand what we had just seen. After that blackout, we completely avoided looking at the house next door at night. Even so, the feeling of being watched didn't go away. Sometimes I felt it inside our house, far from the windows, as if the attention came from somewhere undefined. The worst part was realizing that it didn't feel curious or aggressive. It was neutral, constant, like someone standing and watching out of habit. I began to notice that when we left the house together, the silhouettes didn't appear, but when only one of us was home, especially at night, that was when they showed up more often. That made us even more uneasy. A few days later, I called City Hall to ask about the property. They said the house was officially registered as vacant, without regular electricity service and with no authorized visits. No renovations underway, no caretaker. Officially, no one should have been going in there. That same night, we saw a silhouette for the last time standing at a ground floor window, very close to the glass. It didn't last long. A few seconds later, it slowly stepped back until it disappeared from view. We never saw anything again after that. Months later, we moved away. To this day, when I pass by houses that seem empty at night, I avoid looking at the windows, because I learned that not every occupied house shows signs of life, and not every empty house is truly empty. Before leaving that neighborhood, I still tried to walk past the house during the day, looking carefully, almost searching for some physical proof that someone really went in there. There was nothing. The windows were dusty. The front door had old cobwebs on the frame. The mailbox was rusty and empty. If it weren't for what we had seen so many times at night, I would say it was just an abandoned house like so many others. Even so, I had the strange feeling that during the day the house was just waiting. It didn't seem dead, just turned off, like something that only works when no one is really watching. After we moved, life went on. New neighborhood, brighter house, visible neighbors, parked cars, the normal noise of people living. Even so, that experience never completely left my mind. Sometimes, when I'm driving at night and pass through old streets with houses that are too dark, I feel the same tightness in my chest. I avoid looking at the windows, because I know that if I do, I might end up seeing something standing on the other side staring back. And this time, it might not disappear so quickly. Story 7. I'm 17 years old, I live with my parents, and this happened last year, when we were living in a very quiet neighborhood in rural Texas. Single-story houses, large backyards, tall fences, and streets where almost everyone knows each other, at least by sight. I had always had my own bedroom at the back of the house with a window that faced directly onto the back wall, separating our yard from the neighbor behind us. I never thought that was a problem. I always slept with the window closed because of insects and the heat, and my routine was predictable. School, home, phone, staying up late. Nothing out of the ordinary. Everything started so subtly that for a while I thought I was imagining it. After I turned off the bedroom light and was left only with the faint glow from the streetlight coming through the curtain, I would hear someone call my name. Not loudly. Not shouting. It was a low male voice coming from the other side of the wall. It sounded far too close. The first time I sat up in bed thinking my dad was joking with me from the yard. I called back, but no one answered. I listened for a few seconds, but there was only the distant sound of cars and the chirping of crickets. I ended up lying back down, trying to laugh it off. The second night, it happened again. I had just turned off the light and was on my phone when I heard my name, the same way, in the same low tone. This time, I didn't respond. I stayed still, gripping my phone tightly, trying to figure out whether it was coming from my head or from outside. The sound seemed to come exactly from the spot on the wall behind my bed. My heart started beating fast, and I felt that cold drop in my stomach that comes when something doesn't make sense. After a few seconds, the voice stopped, as if the person had given up. It took me a long time to fall asleep that night. In the following nights, it became a pattern. Always after the light went out. Always the same voice. It never said anything other than my name. Sometimes there was a long pause beforehand, as if the person were waiting for me to go quiet. I started leaving the TV on very low just so I wouldn't be in total darkness, but even then, sometimes I could still hear it. I told my mom, who said it could be a neighbor talking to someone in their yard and the sound was getting mixed up. I tried to believe that, but deep down I knew the voice was calling me, not someone else, and always at the exact moment I was trying to sleep. After a few nights like that, I started changing small things in my routine. I kept the light on until I fell asleep, wore headphones without music just to muffle sounds, pushed my bed a few inches away from the window. Nothing really helped. The voice kept coming back, always low, always far too calm. It never sounded rushed. Sometimes there was a short breath before my name, as if the person were very close to the wall. I lay there staring at the ceiling, counting the seconds between each time, trying to decide whether to scream, call my parents, or pretend I wasn't hearing anything. Some nights I swore I could hear light footsteps on the other side of the wall, dry leaves being stepped on slowly. The yard was completely dark, and the motion sensor light never turned on. I started paying attention to details that had never mattered before, like the sound of the wind hitting the fence, the smell of wet grass coming in through the window crack, the way the house felt too silent when everyone was asleep. My body reacted before my mind did. Every time the light went out, I tensed up, waiting to hear my name again. And almost always I did. After a week like that, I couldn't take it anymore and told my dad everything. I explained it as simply as I could, trying not to cry, saying that someone was calling my name at night from the other side of the wall. He tried to stay calm, but I could tell he was worried. That same night, before going to bed, he went out into the yard with a flashlight and spent a few minutes looking at the back wall. He didn't see anyone. Even so, he told me not to respond if I heard it again, and to call him immediately if anything happened. That gave me a little relief, but it didn't take the fear away. The next day, my dad went to talk to the neighbor behind us in the afternoon. He was an older man who lived alone, someone we only knew by sight. According to my dad, he denied everything immediately. He said he had never called anyone, that he went to bed early, that he wasn't in his yard at night. He spoke in a calm tone, almost offended. My dad came back saying it might have been another neighbor, or even someone passing by on the street. I tried to believe that, but something inside me said it wasn't over. That same night, I tried to sleep early, with my bedroom door open and the hallway light on. I lay there looking at the ceiling, listening to the normal sounds of the house, hoping not to hear anything. When I finally turned off the bedside lamp, the silence didn't last long. From the other side of the wall, the voice came back. This time, it didn't say my name. It used my nickname, the one only my family has used since I was little. It was said slowly, softly, as if the person were smiling. A cold chill ran up my back and my hands started shaking. I called my dad immediately without thinking. The voice stopped instantly, as if it had been switched off. My dad went back out to the yard, more nervous this time, calling out loudly and shining the flashlight at the wall. Nothing. No sound, no movement. He came back trying to seem calm, but I could tell he was shaken. He locked the back gate, closed all the windows, and said I could sleep in the guest room if I wanted. I did. Even far from the wall, it took me a long time to fall asleep, with the clear feeling that someone knew exactly who I was, what I was called at home, and when the house went quiet. That was what scared me the most, because there was no simple explanation. In the days that followed, the house stayed on constant alert. My dad installed a stronger light in the backyard and started locking everything before it even got dark. My mom called several times during the day to check on me. Even so, at night I felt that weight return. I didn't hear the voice again for a few days, which was almost worse. It felt like someone was waiting. I avoided being alone in my room and avoided looking at the wall when I walked down the hallway. Sometimes, in the silence of the early morning, I had the impression that I could hear someone breathing outside, but I couldn't tell if it was real or just built-up fear. On the fourth night after the conversation with the neighbor, The voice came back one last time. I was almost asleep in the guest room when I heard my nickname again, very softly, coming from the direction of the back of the house. It didn't sound irritated or insistent. It sounded certain that I would hear it. I called my dad immediately, and again the voice stopped at the exact same moment. The next day, my dad started talking about raising the wall and installing cameras. Not long after that, we moved. We never found out who was on the other side calling for me, or how that person knew things only my family knew. To this day, when someone says my name too softly behind me, my body reacts before I can even turn around. Before the move, I spent my last nights in that house barely sleeping. Even when I didn't hear anything, I was waiting to hear it. Any small sound, the wind hitting the wall, a branch scraping the fence, the creak of wood, made my heart race. I avoided turning off the light by myself. I avoided silence. The back wall, which had always just been part of the yard, started to feel alive, as if someone were on the other side waiting for the right moment to speak again. I never saw anyone there. There was never proof. Just the voice. Always low. Always in the dark. After we moved, I tried to leave it in the past. New room, new house, no walls pressed up against the window. Even so, to this day, when I turn off the light before sleeping, I stay still for a few seconds, listening. And if I hear someone call my name at night, even if it's just a family member, I feel the same cold run down my spine. Because I learned that the most frightening part wasn't the voice itself. It was knowing that someone had been watching me long enough to know my name, my nickname, my schedule, and that they never needed to cross the wall to get close.
Thank you very much for your company until the end. Your support is what gives life to this channel. If these stories have caught you, don't forget to leave your like and comment on your opinion. And if you are not yet part of our community, sign up now to receive the next real horror stories.